Welcome to Contemporary First Nation Voices, NBE 3C, grade 11 English, college level. And this is Jillian Percy. The class today is number 4, and we're going to be working on key questions 7, 8, and 9. Here are all the ways to contact me. If you want to talk to me while I'm on air about the questions I'm teaching right now, you can call Studio 1-800-465-7144. If you want to talk to me in the office, 1-800-667-3703, and my extension is 2211. My email is jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca. I check that constantly throughout the day. That is the most reliable way to reach me. Facebook, I do have it, and I do have some students who message me on it, but I do not check it constantly because I don't have that many students who do it. My Facebook name is G Percy space Wassa. And if you send me a friend request, please send me a message as well, because that way it for sure shows up in my email. There are 2 different YouTube channels that you can watch the classes on. One is my teacher channel, which is just called G Percy Wassa again. And that has all my classes from last year and this year. And all the classes I've taught this week are posted there. And then we have the Wassa Distance Education YouTube channel. That's the school channel. That has all the classes from all the teachers, but only stuff that we've taught this year. So I haven't actually checked that to see, but it should be up there too. Okay, how to hand in work. If you are handing work in by photograph rather than by scanning it, you have to be very careful with photographs, okay? Please make sure that your photograph is nice and clear so that I can read your writing very well. Don't tilt your phone at a different angle than your work. Your work should be facing the phone directly. That way it's not at a strange angle, because otherwise I can't usually read it. When you do take the photo, don't just hit the share button and send it as an email. That doesn't work very well. It comes up at a very strange size. I have to kind of play around with it quite a bit before I can get it to print properly. Instead, save it on your phone, then write me an email and send it as an attachment. When you do that, it will come up very easily, and it's much, much easier for me to print. Whenever you hand in work, always send it to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. You can include me in the email, but I have to send it to student work anyways, because that way the secretary can log that you submitted the work, and then it's available in the database for anyone to see if we need to, like if the teacher changes or something happens, right? Please include your full name, the course name, the assignment number, and the name right on the assignments that you hand in, okay? I've got 5 different classes. Some of the assignments are very similar, like some of the classes have, they all have a resume or they all have a cover letter. So I can't always tell right just from looking at the assignment, okay? If an assignment asks for both a rough and a good draft, please label which one is which and include them both in the same email, because I do look at them and compare them to see if you've made improvements, which is the whole goal whenever we have a rough draft and a good draft in writing. Okay, plot for the week. Oh my goodness. So we'll see how this goes. We are technically on class 4. I'm still getting the hang of the pacing. I feel like this class moves very fast, and I apologize. I'm going to talk to you quickly about the fact that some of the assignments in yesterday's class were kind of altered from the original. Question 5 that we did originally had no marks for completing it. I don't know why, if that was just an oversight or whatever, and it wasn't officially numbered. So once I did that, that immediately starts to throw off some of the other numbers. And then question 6 was a brand new question as well, because I wanted us to have some practice doing media creation, which is part of the expectations for this course. And I think with a lot of the younger generation, it's been most people are pretty fluid at. So that being said, it affects today's classes. So question 7 from today used to be called number 5. Question 8 used to be called number 6. And question 9 used to be called number 7. Now, it is totally fine to me if you send me in the original version with the original numbers. That is fine. If you see this and realize, oh, hey, I have kind of an older version, contact me and I will just send you the newer version of the course, okay? I find, in my personal opinion, most of the time, the newer version is easier to understand most times. And that's usually why I've added more information, or I've tried to make things that students are mixing up, I try and clarify, that kind of thing. So most times I think the newer version is easier, not harder, but that's kind of how it stands. Okay, so we are still working on unit 1, but we are on to lesson 2, okay? We're gonna be talking about writing an information paragraph, because it's gonna be coming up We did a little bit of this already, but we're going to be doing more of it as we go along. So a paragraph is just a group of sentences that is written about one main idea or topic. And the main idea is often expressed in a topic sentence or the very first sentence usually. You start a new paragraph whenever you introduce a new idea, a new point of view, or a new speaker. So here are the elements of a paragraph. The topic sentence, which explains generally what the paragraph is going to be about. It's kind of vague sometimes. It's usually the very first sentence, like I said. Then the supporting sentence, sometimes called the body sentences, and they support your main idea through different examples, facts, figures, reasons, anecdotes. You should have at least 3 different examples or 3 different sentences to support your idea, but you could have way more than that depending on what you're writing about. And then the concluding sentence is the last sentence, and it should wrap up the idea of the paragraph. Occasionally, it may link to the next idea if you're writing multiple paragraphs. But if you're writing a paragraph all on its own, it's just going to kind of restate the main idea, but in a different way, hopefully a new and interesting way. That is, I sometimes kind of hard to do, but don't forget it. I always look for that. It's one of the key things I look for. And you definitely lose marks if you forget to do a concluding sentence, okay? Even if the rest of your writing is beautiful, I specifically always look for that, all right? All right, transition phrases. They're called expressions, guide the reader from one idea to the next. They are usually followed by a comma. They can be one word or multiple words. They are especially helpful to show your readers the connections between one sentence to the next. They also make your writing more accessible and give it a better sense of flow, so that rather than sounding choppy and unconnected, it just kind of blends together and sounds very fluent and beautiful, I find. On the next page, see a chart that shows some of the useful transition words and expressions and what kind of connection they suggest about the 2 sentences. So here is our chart. So first, if you're wanting to talk or explain chronology, which is time, or the sequence of ideas, you can do first, not firstly, second, third, in the first place, additionally, next, then, or after that. If you're trying to show the differences or contrast between 2 things, you can use phrases like however, on the one hand, on the other hand, on the contrary, although, even though. An additional argument or an additional example could be also, as well as, in addition, furthermore, moreover, additionally. When you're trying to show an example, for example, to illustrate, for instance. And then if you're trying to give emphasis, surely, clearly, in fact, definitely, undoubtedly. Only do that when you really are sure though, okay? And then when you're doing your concluding, things like finally, in conclusion, in short, therefore, thus, to sum up, okay? Sometimes those sound a little bit, I want to say, this isn't a word I would normally like, a little bit pretentious or a little bit too proper. Or sometimes students would say, oh, you're talking all perfect. Yeah, it's not how we talk in normal life. But in writing, because we don't have the benefit of facial expressions and body language and being able to ask the other person questions, all these kind of proper little phrases give the reader sort of a heads up about what's happening. And when you're doing that, it makes the reading easier on your reader and it makes you a better writer. Okay, so sometimes when I switch from Canva to PowerPoint, they squash my stuff a little bit. Okay, so there's 3 main parts. We just talked about that. So opening sentences in the white here. There are 3 reasons why WASA is the best school to attend. By the way, I didn't write this, by the way. This was in the book. All right, and then all the stuff in yellow is your body sentences. So you can see the biggest part of your paragraph should be your body sentences. That's where you're doing all your really interesting information and examples, okay? And then at the very end, we've got our concluding sentence. Okay, so it says, there are 3 reasons why WASA is the best school to attend. First, WASA offers a wide range of high school courses. Students can take grade 9 through grade 12 courses in all subject areas. Second, WASA offers independent learning and radio courses. Students who are self-motivated can take IL courses and work at their own pace for up to 10 months. Students who like more guidance can take radio courses with a teacher on air 4 times per week for 9 weeks. Finally, students who take WASA courses don't have to leave their homes and families to earn a high school diploma. In conclusion, WASA meets the needs of all students. Okay. So, support questions. Now, at the beginning of the class, we talked about how when there's any key questions that you have to answer them. So support questions are different. These are not required and they do not earn you any marks. They're just questions to help you think about what you've read. And generally when I'm doing this, I'm trying to highlight what information is really important so you notice it and help you summarize large chunks of text into smaller chunks because you're trying to summarize what you've learned. And generally when we summarize things, it actually helps us remember it way more strongly than if we just read it and then don't do anything with that information, okay? So this is support question number 1. Again, it's not for marks, but the paragraph we just read, identify the following parts of a paragraph from the sample above. So I'm going to go flip back to it. What is the topic or opening sentence? There are 3 reasons why WASA is the best school to attend. So right here, I would just write, there are 3 reasons why WASA is the best school to attend. And you can see they haven't told me a whole lot, but they have told me their opinion about the topic. Their opinion is what's the best school? And the topic is, I guess, schools to go to, or maybe WASA. And there we go. And then what are my 3 supporting points? Now, I don't have to put every single example, but what is the big idea of my 3 points? First, that WASA offers a wide range of school courses. Okay. So I'm not going to write first. I'm just going to write, so offers a wide range of courses. Now, you can see this is not in sentence format. I'm just putting it point form because I'm going to try and show you how do we do this later on with writing, and I want you to get the hang of it with reading, okay? Second, WASA offers independent learning and radio courses. Okay, so offers 2 types, independent learning and radio. Okay, and then what's my third idea? Finally, they didn't say third, they used the word finally here instead. Students who take WASA courses don't have to leave their homes to go to high school. Okay. So I'm just going to write no need to leave home to do high school. Okay. And then what is our actual concluding sentence? In conclusion, WASA meets the needs of all students. Okay. In conclusion, so tiny, sir. Sorry, guys. WASA meets the needs of all students. Okay, I'm gonna make that big. I don't know why the other ones came out big and not that one. It's weird. Sec. That'll have to do. Okay, so this is the kind of thing where if you did it, it helps you understand the parts, but you don't need to send it in to me. I'm not looking for it. I'm not marking it. I'm not checking it. It's just to help you think kind of clearly and help you process the information, basically. And then it asks, what are some of the transition phrases that were used in the paragraph? So I'm going to go back. They use the word first, second, they use the word finally, and they used the word in conclusion. I'm going to try and make this bigger right away. Let me see, can I do that? I think I can. Okay, so they used the word first, second. They didn't use the word third, interestingly. They said finally instead. And then they used the phrase in conclusion. Okay, so key question number 6, this is the one that used to be number 5. Choose 3 of the authors that we've read in lessons 1 and 2. For each of the 3 authors, describe how they explore their identity through their writing and why you think it was important for them to do so. Write a proper information paragraph for each of the 3 authors that you discuss. On the previous page, we used a chart or a graphic organizer to help us identify the different parts of a paragraph that we read. We can also use the exact same type of chart to help us plan out a paragraph that we want to write. Use the graphic organizers that I've included below to help you plan out your information paragraphs. When you hand this in, please send in the planning organizer, the rough draft, and a final draft for each one of the paragraphs, and I will be looking for those, okay? If any one of those are missing for each one of those 3 authors, then you're going to be losing marks, okay? So I am looking for them. So here is planning organizer. So I would pick one of the authors and just kind of, because he was the very first one we studied, let's say I looked at Drew Hayden Taylor. I think I spelled it right. Okay, now off the top of my head, I don't have an idea, right? Sometimes people get frustrated because they're like, well, I don't have any ideas right there. No, me neither, right? Nobody does. You have to go back and look at it and kind of think about it. It's a little bit like doing a puzzle. You know how you look at a puzzle and you don't just instantly know where all the pieces go? You have to kind of look at it for a little while, look at the overall picture. So here's our overall picture. Here's the structure. I'm looking for a big idea and I'm looking for 3 points, and it's on the topic of identity. Okay. Is there anything else I need to know about? Let's see. How did they describe their identity and why do you think it was important for them? So I would go back and take a look at Drew Hayden Taylor's stuff. Now, we did a little mini internet research project. There might be important information there. We read his book about I forget, it's from the series of essays called Funny You Don't Look Like One. Oh, Observations of a Blue-Eyed Ojibwe, right? Which was very, very interesting. It talked about how people didn't believe that he was First Nations and having to like whip out his status card to prove it and getting called in for auditions as an actor and people being like, well, you don't look First Nations enough, so no, we're not giving you the part because you're not what we wanted you to look like, sort of thing. So his identity was very firmly in being Ojibwe, but kind of having to be Ojibwe sort of, I don't know how to put it, like, I want to say like rebelliously or fervently, in spite of people not believing him. And then at the very end of the essay, he's actually kind of silly and talks about how because he's part Ojibwe and part Caucasian, he's going to make a whole new race called the Occasions, which I thought was hilarious, by the way. And because he feels like he doesn't quite maybe fit in either category. And so as I'm talking about that, I think maybe that's kind of my main topic. Okay. Now I'm not going to go all the way through this. Okay. I'm just going to kind of show you what I mean. Like, so Drew Hayden Taylor identifies strongly as an Ojibwe man, despite his appearance uh, getting in the way, interfering. I'm going to make it change it, interfering in other people's ability to see him as one. Now, I want to point out, there is not just one right idea. I could look at this tomorrow and have a completely different idea. If 10 people looked at the exact same essay, they might have 10 different ideas. So please do not in any way feel like you have to copy mine. I'm sorry, I just realized now I spelled that wrong. This is just kind of my, literally off the top of my head, right? I didn't plan this out. I just kind of wanted to think out loud in front of you to see how it happens. And then I would look through and think about some of my supporting ideas for how he talks about his identity, because it's clearly important with him, right? Like at one point he gets into a really ferocious argument with somebody about it. So it's been a thing for him. So I would think about my ideas, I would think of examples, and then I would wrap it up. And then I would move on to another author that we studied, okay? So you'd flip back through for lesson 1 and 2. We talked about, I think, 4 or 5 different authors, and pick the ones that you resonated with, right? If you look at their stuff and think, I don't quite get what they're saying, or I don't understand what they're saying about identity, or that kind of stuff, then don't use them. Use somebody else that you do understand better, okay? That's fine. All right, so then, yeah. After you pick the author, decide what you feel is their big idea about the identity. And like I said, there isn't just one right answer, okay? And then you can think about how to support this. Are there certain sentences or lines in their writing that state that idea directly or kind of indirectly? Are there certain words that they choose that contribute to the concept of identity? Are there certain topics that they are writing about that show you what they value or what they perceive as their identity? Remember how we talked about how we often all place our identity in different things, right? The middle part only needs to be about 3 sentences long, although it could be longer, and then you wrap up the paragraph with a closing sentence. So certain words that contribute to the concept of identity. Right away, when I see something like that, I would think about what are some synonyms for identity, okay? What are some other words that might mean something like that that I would look for? Oh, hang on a second, let me see if it's up here. Okay, good. Okay, so synonyms for identity. Okay. They've got name, identification, recognition, distinguishing individuality, self, selfhood, personality, character, originality. Okay, what are some other ones here? Okay, similarity, sameness, equivalence, resemblance. See, I don't like, let me try this one. Personality. Okay, selfhood, individualism, uniqueness, separateness, temperament, individuality, self-identity. Yeah. Okay, that's kind of more what I'm aiming for. So I might kind of like just kind of think about that, like character, personality, individuality. They use the word self-identity, which I think is a really good one. Things like that. What are some words that they choose that kind of hint at that kind of topic? Okay. Let me think here. And then the same planner that we used to help us read that paragraph, you're going to use again just to keep on doing this, okay? So there's 3 about the writers, and then they want to talk about your ideas about identity, okay? Now, this is one of those things where sometimes people really think about this kind of stuff, and sometimes people have really not ever kind of thought about this stuff. Just some people that, we think a lot, and some people are like, oh, I'm just driving through it. And I think part of this depends a little bit on how young and how old you are sometimes, right? I think the older you are, sometimes you kind of struggle with the idea of identity a little bit more. But you may feel very differently. So either what you felt before you read these things, or based on some ideas that you may have since reading some of these authors, what are your ideas about identity? What do you feel about the importance of identity, or how you developed your identity, or what is crucial to your personal identity? Okay. And then what are sort of 3 supporting points that go along with this? You give evidence of examples of why it's important, of explain it further, different kind of things that you could explain about identity, and why you do think identity is or is not important. Not everybody thinks identity is absolutely important. For some people, other things are much more important. And again, you still want to follow the classic paragraph structure of have an opening, have your main ideas, and then have your concluding sentence, okay? So this one is kind of a big one. It's one of those ones, if you want to like kind of send it in to me piece by piece as you're working on it, that's fine. Remember that you have to have the planner and then a rough draft and then a revised draft. I just suddenly realized that we haven't really talked about a revised draft. Maybe the other day. I'm trying to remember here. Hang on a second. Maybe I can just, well, let me do this. Yes, okay. Okay. So from the rough draft to the revised draft. I'm just going to talk about this really quickly because most people are able to get from the planner to the rough draft. But then what I find happens is sometimes people kind of get stuck and they're like, I wrote what I wrote. I don't know how to make it any better. So, okay, so here are some examples of how to improve your rough draft. Okay. So the very first thing is make sure your ideas are clear. One way to do this is try reading out loud to yourself or someone else. sometimes when you're thinking it in your head, it sounds okay, and then you say it out loud, and you're like, oh wait, that doesn't make sense. I forgot some words, or that's a little fuzzy. Or sometimes you read it to someone else and they're like, what? I don't quite get what you mean. So then that's the very first thing, is make sure your ideas are clear and easy to understand. Okay. That's the very, very, very first thing. Are your examples detailed enough? Hint, make sure you have examples. Okay. The other thing is, be very careful not to repeat. Don't repeat yourself. Sometimes people kind of get used to that thing where the teacher says, oh, you got to fill up half a page. And they just kind of keep on thinking of 6 different ways to say the same thing. Please don't do that. A lot of times when teachers are saying that, it's because they're trying to get you in the habit of writing longer for journals. And I'm going to confess something here, they don't always necessarily read that, but I do read these. So please don't repeat yourself over and over again, because I will notice for sure. The other thing is, think about vocabulary, okay? Especially repeated words. Sometimes we have a word in our head and we can't think of another word as we're writing, and that's totally fine. You use the word. And then when you go back and look at it, you're like, man, I use that same word like 10 times in that paragraph. And so you go and you hit the thesaurus and you go, okay, what are some other ways to say that word? And they mean the same thing, but it's just a little more interesting to our brain to hear it said differently. The other thing is, sometimes we've picked things like, another example would be like the word walked slowly. Well, that's not a bad phrase, right? It's legitimate, but there are more interesting words that convey the idea of walked slowly. Like, could be like trudged, which makes me think of somebody like dreading something and walking somewhere they don't want to go. Or I could be, say, like strolled, which makes me think more of somebody who's just kind of happy and peaceful and not walking very fast for a different reason. So in those cases, those are stronger words because they convey more information. So that's another area to look at. The other one, big areas to look at is sentence structure, okay? Incomplete sentences and run-on sentences, okay? If your entire paragraph is one sentence and there's only one period, that's not okay, right? Each sentence should have its own subject and its own thing that's happening, and then you move on to a new sentence, okay? So we'll talk a little bit more now later on. I'm not going to tackle that right now, but those are some kind of starting points for how to improve your rough draft to your revised draft. And then, yeah, obviously you look for things like spelling. Yeah, I'll say that too, I guess. Spelling, grammar, punctuation, capitalization. I feel like there's one more. That's the big ones, I think. Okay, so we're going to move on to lesson number 3. Oh yeah, I was saying, if you don't have that planning organizer and you want one, just send me a note and I will happily send you one. Okay, so now we're moving on to lesson 3, which kind of has a new concept. That's how the lessons aren't assignments, they're more like concepts. So this concept is all about the idea of a short story. Hang on a second, sorry. Okay, so the short story is a genre that most writers attempt, and only some do well. The trick in writing short stories is to say a lot in a short space. In a novel, a writer can wander to many locales and introduce many characters. But the short story writer is challenged to convey complex ideas in a seemingly simple but much shorter format, which is harder. Writing shorter is generally harder if you're still trying to convey complex ideas. You're going to examine the different elements that make up a story, and you're going to read a short story, and then we're going to analyze the story for those elements, okay? We may not get to all of that today, just looking at the time here. So one of the first elements of a short story is plot. The plot of a short story is going to resolve around one central conflict. Novels may have all sorts of subplots, like think of soap operas, right? But a short story doesn't have room for that. They have one main issue, and that's the issue they discuss. There are several different types of conflict that are universal around literature. One, individual versus individual, which they sometimes phrase as man versus man, but they don't want people to be offended. Individual versus themselves. Individual versus society, like society's rules or society's expectations or that kind of thing. Individual versus the supernatural, ghosts, monsters. Individual versus nature. Another one I just noticed that they don't have here is individual versus technology. That's kind of a newer one. But if you think of things like the Terminator, right, where the machines have taken over the world, or the War Games movie, where the artificial intelligence machine has decided that it's going to end things. A conflict is simply a problem that exists between characters. The conflict does not necessarily result in violence. Like, they don't necessarily have to be hitting each other. They could just be angry or upset or taking actions that will oppose each other. The conflict does create tension, and usually excitement in the plot, and it's part of what generates the interest for the reader in the story. A story in which nothing happens is not usually that interesting to read. Okay, number two, oh, this is a part of number one, the plot graph. The plot of the story becomes solving the conflict, basically. The plot develops along the plot graph, which is a standard formula for the short story. Look at it illustrated below. So number 1, 2, 3, 4, which we are going to talk about in a second, okay? This, by the way, is the beginning, and then the top, and then all the way down to the end here. Hang on a second. Okay, so number 1 is introduction. It introduces the reader to the conflict, the characters, and the setting. It is usually very quickly developed in a short story within a few paragraphs, because most short stories are less than 30 pages, can be much less than that. And so you don't have a lot of room, okay? And then rising action. This is going to be most of the story, really. Several events will take place that create tension and develop the conflict. Generally, obstacles get in the way, problems happen. People are trying to do stuff and it doesn't work, and they have to try a new thing. Things occur, okay? Further complications or obstacles are introduced, and the author creates suspense. Are they going to make it? Are they not going to make it? Are they going to think of a different solution? Oh my gosh, what would I do if I was in that situation? All those kind of things. And then number 3 is the climax. That's the highest point. It's usually known as the turning point, and it's usually the most exciting point, right? Like, that might be the big, if there was a big fight scene, the big car chase scene, where the detective finally figures out, ooh, I know who did it, all those kind of things. The main conflict is normally resolved at that point, but then there's some falling action, right? Like, everything doesn't happen in an instant. So there's all these actions and events and things that normally have to get wrapped up. It's usually a much shorter part than the rising action, okay? Especially in a short story. That might be like a page or even less, okay? The big part is going to be really this beginning part, okay? So those are the 4 main parts of a plot. In a novel, you would probably separate the falling action and then there'd be like an end, because those would kind of be a little bit different. But for a short story, they really do fall together. Okay, where are we at? Okay, setting. Sorry. Okay. The setting of a short story encompasses both time and place. Sometimes the setting of a story is incidental or not really important, right? However, one can think of numerous examples where the setting becomes almost like another character. Historical stories where the time period is huge. If you think of like Downtown Abbey recently, or Bridgerton, those have a certain time period they're trying to convey, and that hugely affects everything that's happening in that story. Wilderness adventures where place matters, right? A story where your plane crashes in the northern wilderness, like in Hatchet, is going to have a completely different story than somebody who gets like lost in a desert, because there's different kinds of setting and different kind of problems to face. Or science fiction, where again, usually the writer has imagined a certain kind of society, or a certain new planet or environment of some sort, like a spaceship. And usually the setting has a lot to do with what actions are happening. So the idea of time and place is kind of important. If you've mostly read stories that are about the present day, you may not have thought about the time issue. Like, some people never look at science fiction, so they don't think about, oh yeah, stories could be written in the future, sorry. Most of us are aware that stories can be written in the past, but we don't always like reading it, because the setting is so different. It can actually make reading that story a bit of a challenge. And then the third element of short stories are characters. The characters in a short story tend to be very few in number, so the author can work on developing them as fully as possible. It might be 1 or 2 or maybe 3 characters. You're not going to have a huge ensemble cast like a show like Downton Abbey or Grey's Anatomy or things like that, because there's just not room for them. Usually characters in a short story are revealed. There's little time for developing their character. Now, I disagree that. I think that sometimes the main character will get developed a little bit, okay? Depending on the story, depending on what they're trying to do, okay? So some important elements about character are protagonist versus antagonist. The protagonist of the story is the hero. They aren't necessarily good, okay? But they are the main character, and usually you're seeing the story and the events from their viewpoint, right? I can't remember that. Oh, I know. That show Dexter, right? Dexter is not in any way a good guy, really, right? But he is the protagonist. Sometimes they call them the anti-hero, okay? He is the main character. He is who you are following. This person is usually in conflict with the antagonist, who can be the villain, or just can be that person's, the person that they're constantly kind of rubbing up against, right? Sorry, that sounded funny. I didn't mean that the way. Like in terms of they're constantly in conflict with that person for some reason. That person might not be a villain. Like if you see cop shows, sometimes there's like one other cop who's always driving the main cop crazy. They're not a bad person, but they're annoying or something, right? That person can still become the antagonist, right? Rounded versus flat characters. Rounded characters have numerous characteristics and play a significant role in the action. Usually when they say rounded, they mean like well-rounded, like they don't seem flat or superficial or fake. They have complexity to them. Flat characters are supporting players. They may serve a purpose in the plot, but they don't usually appear for very long, and they're not usually very complex. They're usually very simple. So like the taxi driver that takes you from one place to the next. Maybe they're a little bit sarcastic, but they don't really go any further into that guy's life because he's only going to show up for that paragraph, right? Things like that where there's not a real reason. The big problem with short stories is if someone's a poor writer, every character may seem flat. And that is the thing you don't want to have happen. At least your main character should seem well-rounded because you want your reader to be interested, and generally people aren't interested if characters seem flat or unrealistic or too simple. Okay, and then the last element is theme. Okay, now theme is kind of a difficult concept for many students. I think I find it difficult too, to be honest. Many people confuse the word topic with the idea of theme. Topic is just sort of what the story's about, and it's usually could be summarized in one word. Common topics are things like love, friendship, war, loyalty, things like that. Theme is what the story is trying to say about the topic, kind of the idea about the topic. Theme is your statement of opinion about the topic. So here are some examples of topic versus theme. So the topic might be loyalty, but the theme might be loyalty is the most important element of friendship. See how this is the idea about loyalty. Topic war versus the theme. Some wars are justified, right? And keeping in mind, like a different story might have a completely different theme. It might say, no war is ever justified, right? One way to make sure you have a clear idea of which one is which is to notice topics are usually one word, themes are like an entire sentence, and they will usually state an opinion. The other thing that sometimes gets mixed up is theme versus the idea of message, okay? So a theme is a general issue or concept that's being explored in the story as the plot unfolds and as the characters make decisions and create goals and interact with different obstacles. A theme may, and hopefully should, cause the reader to feel thoughtful and kind of explore their own ideas and choices on the concept. Deeper questions about identity, society, love, philosophy, or morality are often raised. A theme is sometimes referred to as a message, but some people don't like that comparison because they feel it's not a good synonym. They think of message as more of a short, simplistic idea, like the morals in children's books that encourage them to be kind or not to lie. I have to admit, I tend to use the words interchangeably. I do think of them as synonyms, but not everybody does. And I'm just kind of giving you a heads up because I know you have other teachers and other English teachers. And so you may come across one who has a very strong opinion on that. And I don't want you to be like, oh, but Jill told me this. Like, well, yeah, everyone has a different opinion on this one. And I do think a theme is the hardest part to understand because it's not usually directly stated, right? They don't usually suddenly say, I think friendship is the most important element of a marriage, because that would be overly simplistic. But they might imply that through the choices they make and the actions they make and the dialogue they have. You have to kind of step back a little bit and look at the overall picture and to get an idea of what the theme is for a short story. I think it's easier in a short story than it is in a novel because a novel has so much that it can sometimes be a little bit hard to step back. Okay, so this is support question number 2. This section is not for marks, okay? This is just to help you summarize and process what we just read. What are the 4 main elements in any story? Do you remember? So the 4 main elements were or are plot, setting, character, and theme. Okay. What are the 4 main parts of a plot? We have the introduction, the rising action, the climax, and then we have usually like the falling action. I'm going to put /end. Okay. What are the 2 parts of the setting? The 2 parts of the setting are time and place. Okay, so here I started the sentence. If you were writing this, I wouldn't want you to just do the answer. I would want you to write in complete sentences. It's kind of a huge thing, especially because this is a college level course. So when you're trying to write in a complete sentence, you want to restate the question as the beginning of your answer. So when can setting be an extremely important part of the story? So I'm going to use that section to help me begin my sentence. Setting can be an important part of the story when the story is set in the past and has a huge influence on characters' choices. Setting can also be important in survival or wilderness stories, where the character is fighting the setting, usually fighting to survive the setting. Okay, now I've got a bunch of, hang on a second. So I don't want all this underlined. I was just underlining to show you how I took the end of the question and made it the beginning of my answer, okay? Does that make sense? How would you define the topic, and how does the topic differ from the theme? So we talked a little bit about topic. So the topic is the 1-word summary of the subject of the story. And how is the topic different from the theme? The topic is 1 word, but the theme is an entire sentence that states an idea about the topic. Sorry. Now here, because the sentences were a little bit shorter, I didn't use the reverse strategy quite as much. Hang on. I'm gonna make this a little bit smaller so I can actually read it. Let's see if there's room here. Okay. How is theme different to message for some people? Okay. So some people feel that A message is a simplistic moral for children, while a theme is more complicated and I'm not trying to phrase that. I feel like I want to go back and see that really quickly because more complicated for sure. But what was the other idea? Um, feel thoughtful, explores deeper questions about identity, society. Okay, so I'm going to kind of put something like that there. Hang on a second. It's more complicated and explores bigger ideas about society and other issues. Sorry, I'm running out of room there, so that's why I'm going there. Okay, so again, if you did this, you might get slightly different answers than me. The very first little bit, the first 3 questions, you wouldn't have different answers because those are straightforward. Yeah, those are straightforward. Those are just looking and reading. This part is getting a little bit more, you have to think about it, okay? So don't hand this in, right? Because I'm not marking this. We just did it together. That's why we did it together, was to kind of just make sure you understood what we read about. We're not going to have time to get through all of that today. Trying to think if I even have time to get through this. Uh, Okay. On your own, key question number 8 is trying to understand the idea of sovereignty because it's going to help us understand the short story we're about to read, okay? Find and write out a definition of the word sovereignty using a dictionary, 2 marks. Number 2, do an internet search of the phrase First Nation sovereignty and jot down 4 or 5 points that either expand on the dictionary definition or are significantly different to it, right? If they have a different definition, then you might want to know that, especially if you're writing, using First Nations based sources compared to just a dictionary, which is not necessarily First Nations based. And then number 3, after you read a bit of this information, create a response of your own about what you feel a sovereignty means. Your ideas can be based on what you read, your own lived experiences, your community's stance on it, and whatever you feel is important. Try to give at least one example of how sovereignty might work or be important in a First Nations community. Please try to write at least 3 to 4 sentences on the idea. So a closed question versus an open question. An open question, like the last one, is usually designed to help you share your thoughts and opinion. Open-ended questions don't have only one right answer. It's not the same thing. A closed question might have only one right answer, okay? So a closed question like, what kind of cake did you eat on your birthday? Well, I had chocolate cake. There's no other answer, that's just what happened, right? But an open-ended question is usually asking for ideas and opinions, and so there's not really a wrong answer, but you do want to have an answer that explains your ideas fully. So if I said, how do you like to celebrate your birthday? I used to like big parties, but now that I'm older, I just want to get together with a few friends. Sometimes we may go out at a favorite restaurant because that just seems easier. I don't really care about presents, just seeing my friends is enough. So this is what's called a short answer question, which is a little bit different than a paragraph. And sometimes students find short answer questions a little bit tricky. They need to be a little bit longer than a sentence, but they aren't quite a formal paragraph either. And sometimes students tend to manage their confusion in a couple ways. Either they just ignore the request for more and just do one sentence because they're not really sure what else to do, or they repeat the one sentence in a slightly different way without really providing new information. So my suggestion is approach it like it's a mini paragraph. Give yourself a general opening statement and then expand on it with 2 or 3 examples and ideas. So, for example, if I said, what do you think about getting older? My general statement might be, I mind getting older less and less as I go along, and then I might add some details. I am grateful to be alive, despite all the worries and difficulties. Life gets sweeter somehow. I am less worried about how others view my choices of music, clothing, and hobbies. I am more concerned about finding, I have job here, not job, joy, and being the kind of person I don't regret. So I gave you my big idea and then I gave you some details. So for this thing on, hang on a second, sovereignty, that's what I'm looking for. Give me your big idea and then give me some details. And then we're not going to go any further today. We are going to talk about Thomas King on not Monday because Monday's a holiday, so there's no class on Monday, on Tuesday, okay? Have a good weekend. Call me if you need help with anything, guys. Take care.